You were told the greatest victory in life is to be chosen, to be wanted, to be loved. But what if that very desire is the reason you're losing yourself? What if the chase for affection is the slowest form of self-destruction? You bend, you shrink, you silence your instincts just to keep someone close. And still, it's never enough. Do you know why it hurts so much when they leave? Because deep down, you made them the source of your worth. Every time you looked at them hoping to be seen, a piece of you disappeared. This isn't love, it's dependency wearing perfume. And dependency tears you apart in silence. The Stoics warned us, to need is to be enslaved. They believed the nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. But calm doesn't grow in chaos, it grows in solitude. Until you can stand alone without trembling, you will always be at the mercy of someone else's absence. This video will not comfort you, it will confront you. Because you cannot become sovereign until you bury the part of you that begs to be chosen. If you're ready to stop living for others and start reclaiming yourself, consider subscribing. To rise, to mark the moment you chose clarity over chaos, truth over illusion, and freedom over the soft chains of validation. You were told that happiness begins the moment someone else sees you, chooses you, accepts you. That the real story starts not with your own mind, but when someone else validates your existence. From childhood it was everywhere. Fairy tales where fulfillment only arrives with a partner. Movies where the final reward is someone falling in love with the hero, and the casual remarks of well-meaning adults who ask, "When are you going to settle down?" You were handed the idea that being alone was a waiting room for something better, that if you're single, you're somehow incomplete. But here's the truth that rarely gets spoken. If your peace can only exist in the presence of someone else, then it isn't peace. It's dependency dressed up as destiny. What no one told you is that you were never supposed to search for your other half. You were meant to become whole on your own. The Stoics knew this long before it became a catchy quote on the internet. Epictetus said, "Only the educated are free." But the education he meant wasn't found in schools or lectures. It was the education of knowing your own mind. Knowing when your thoughts are your own, and when they've been implanted by a world that profits off your need to be chosen. They taught you to chase validation before you even knew what self-worth was. That's not love. That's a training program designed to keep you seeking approval and fearing your own company. And when you seek approval, you slowly trade away your power. You start to shrink in places you should expand. You quiet yourself just to keep someone comfortable. You second-guess your instincts because you're afraid to be rejected. These are not isolated moments. They're daily rituals that over time form a life that doesn't belong to you. And you might call it love, but love that costs you. Your voice isn't love. It's silence forced into a smile. That's why the most dangerous lie you were told is that being alone means something's wrong with you. No, it means nothing is pulling you off your center. If you've ever sat alone and felt that quiet discomfort crawling up your spine, understand this. It's not loneliness speaking. It's withdrawal from the false identity you built to be accepted. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you cannot do that when your reflection depends on someone else's gaze. You cannot do that when every choice is filtered through the fear of being left. You cannot do that while you still believe solitude is a punishment and not the purest path to knowing yourself. Think about how easily you've given pieces of yourself away. The opinions you've softened, the ambitions you've delayed, the dreams you've diluted so someone wouldn't feel threatened, not because you're weak, but because you were raised to believe that compromise is the price of being loved. But Marcus Aurelius warned us, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. You estimated that rejection was deadly. You believed solitude was shameful. But pain from being alone is not proof that you're broken. It's proof that you've finally stopped distracting yourself and now must face what's really inside. And what's inside you is not empty. It's not flawed. It's unclaimed, untouched, still waiting for you to walk back into yourself without bringing someone else's opinion along. That's the power solitude gives you, the mirror no one else can distort. That is why so few people seek it. Not because it's miserable, but because it reveals too much. It removes the excuses. It asks you to stop pretending you're lost and start admitting you've just never looked inward with honesty. And the moment you do, you begin to reclaim everything that was scattered in the name of being chosen. Dependence whispers that you'll be safe if someone just loves you enough. Stoicism shouts that safety is an illusion if it depends on someone else's behavior. Seneca wrote, "As long as you need validation from others, you're giving them power over your peace." And peace isn't found in holding on, it's found in letting go. Letting go of the need to be seen. Letting go of the idea that your worth rises and falls with someone else's attention. Letting go of the fantasy that love will fix what you're unwilling to face. You don't need to be chosen. You need to choose. Choose to stand still in the discomfort. Choose to peel away the layers of falsehood. Choose to stop waiting for someone to come along and give you permission to feel worthy. That's not strength. That's surrender. And if your definition of love includes surrendering your freedom, it's time to rewrite that definition. The truth is, you were never incomplete. You were interrupted, pulled away from yourself by years of stories that said real life begins when someone else says you matter. But your life isn't on hold. It's happening right now, in the silence, in the space where no one's watching, and where everything you thought you were waiting for is already within you. The Stoics didn't teach detachment as escape. They taught it as clarity. To be able to sit with yourself without fear, without needing, without clinging, that's freedom. So no, you're not broken for being alone. You're just finally unlearning the lie. You're just beginning to hear the truth that's been buried under every soft song and sweet promise that told you love would save you. But you were never meant to be saved. You were meant to be sovereign. And sovereignty doesn't come from being wanted. It comes from no longer needing to be. No one ever told you the price you'd pay for being loved. It's never a dramatic all-at-once sacrifice. It's slow, quiet, barely noticeable. It happens in moments you brush off. A word you didn't say to avoid conflict. A dream you shelved because it made someone uncomfortable. A boundary you softened so you wouldn't seem difficult. These things don't feel like surrender at first. They feel like care, like compromise, like love. But each one chips away at your sense of self until one day you wake up and don't recognize the person looking back at you. Not because you've changed, but because you've been eroded. When you search for validation in someone else, you begin to live outside your own body. You shift your decisions based on how they'll be received. You adjust your energy, your timing, your truth, to make sure you're not too much or too distant. You trade your clarity for comfort, your inner peace for outer approval, not all at once, but in little pieces, and it's subtle, which makes it dangerous. You don't notice it happening until your mind becomes noisy and your spirit feels crowded. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And this is what the trade does. It keeps you facing outward so you never confront what's within. You end up giving your most precious currency, your time, to people who don't know what to do with it. Your energy gets drained trying to meet expectations that were never yours to begin with. You pour into others in hopes they'll reflect something back. Something like worth or love or certainty. but no one can reflect what they haven't cultivated in themselves. If they're empty, they can't fill you, and if they're confused, they'll only distort you. Yet we keep bending, giving, shrinking, just for a chance at belonging. That's not strength. That's fear wearing a kind face. The Stoics understood this. They warned that if your peace depends on anything outside of your control, it isn't real peace. It's fragile, borrowed, and always at risk. That includes how people see you, what they say about you, whether or not they approve of your choices. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The nearer a person comes to a calm mind, the closer they are to strength. But a calm mind doesn't grow in the presence of chaos. It doesn't bloom when you're performing. It builds itself in solitude, where there's no one left to impress and no illusion left to maintain." What makes this trade so dangerous is that it feels like survival. You think you're doing what you need to do to keep someone close. You think you're being mature or selfless or understanding, and sometimes you are, but over time, the habit of constantly adjusting for others becomes a pattern. Then it becomes a life. And one day, you realize that every version of yourself has been shaped by someone else's comfort level. That's not identity. That's adaptation. We're not meant to live that way. The soul isn't designed to be constantly edited. It needs room to breathe. It needs silence. It needs stillness. And that can't happen when your attention is scattered in every direction but inward. You start to lose your intuition, not because it's gone, but because the noise has drowned it out. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself, but the adversity we fear most is the kind that requires walking alone, saying no, choosing silence over approval. That's where your self is tested and where it's built." Think of how much you've already given, how many hours you've lost explaining yourself, waiting for a reply, doubting your instincts, rethinking your value based on someone else's mood. These moments pile up. They become weights tied to your focus, distractions wrapped in false hope. And all of it stems from the same quiet belief that you are not enough unless someone else says you are. That lie is heavy, but the truth is heavier because it asks you to stop giving away what was never meant to be negotiated. When you stop chasing validation, you reclaim your power in pieces. At first, it feels unfamiliar. It may even feel wrong, like you're being selfish or distant or cold. But what you're really doing is drawing your energy back into alignment. You're no longer leaking it in all directions. You're redirecting it, refining it, giving it to your goals, your peace, your growth. And suddenly, your mind starts to clear. Not because the world got easier, but because you stopped handing your calmness to people who couldn't protect it. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And how can you know yourself when you're constantly shape-shifting for someone else's love? Wisdom begins when the trade ends, when you realize that what you thought was connection was often compliance, that what felt like being seen was sometimes just being used, and when you finally understand that your value doesn't increase based on how much you sacrifice, but on how much you protect your center, that's when everything changes. This isn't about pushing people away. It's about pulling yourself back. It's about building the kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, doesn't adjust itself to be palatable. The kind of strength that stands still in the storm because it knows who it is. When you stop making that trade, you'll feel the difference immediately. Not in how others treat you, but in how you treat yourself. You'll stop negotiating your worth. You'll stop over-explaining. You'll stop handing over your inner peace like it's disposable, because you'll know it's sacred. And the truth is, no one can give you what you won't give yourself. Not love, not clarity, not peace. Those things don't arrive when someone chooses you. They begin the moment you stop choosing to be lost. So let the trade end here. Let the silence return. Let the calm mind be your anchor. And let your strength speak not in how much you're willing to lose, but in how deeply you've remembered what you were never meant to give away. There's a reason most people keep themselves busy. A reason they always have music playing, notifications buzzing, screens glowing. Because in silence, something unfamiliar begins to rise. A discomfort, an ache, a voice that hasn't been heard in years. That voice is your real self, buried beneath the noise, and solitude is the only place it knows how to speak. But the world taught you that being alone is a problem, that silence equals failure, that if no one is calling, no one cares, so you run from it, you distract yourself, you stay in places too long just to avoid the quiet. But silence isn't what breaks you. What breaks you is the fear of meeting yourself in it. Solitude isn't a punishment. It's a crucible, a place of heat, pressure, and refinement. It's where everything false begins to melt, where your masks dissolve, your distractions collapse, and all that's left is the truth. Not the version of you that smiles when it's expected, not the version who performs worthiness, but the raw, unfinished, aching version you've hidden away to survive. That version doesn't need followers, applause, or approval. It needs your attention. It needs your presence. It needs you to stop running and just sit still long enough to hear what it's been trying to say all along. And yet, this is what most people avoid, because solitude exposes everything. The anger you've buried, the grief you've numbed, the dreams you gave up on too soon. These things don't show up when you're surrounded by distraction. They only arrive in the stillness. And that's what makes solitude a forge. It doesn't comfort. It transforms. It doesn't decorate the ego. It tears it apart. But if you can stay in the fire, if you can resist the urge to numb, to flee, to reach for someone else's hand, you'll come out the other side with something unbreakable. Not an identity built on validation, but one forged in solitude. That's the kind of presence that can't be taken from you, because it wasn't given by anyone else. It's built, earned, carved out of hours spent alone, face to face with the most difficult truths of who you are and who you're not. People fear solitude because they associate it with emptiness. But it's not emptiness. It's space. Space to think, to remember, to question, to rebuild. Space to ask yourself who you would be if no one was watching, if no one had expectations, if no one was around to reward or punish you for your choices. And most importantly, would you even recognize that person? The answer to that tells you everything. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." But most of us have never even knocked on that door. We think our worth is proven in the presence of others, that if people love us, we must be doing something right. But love given to a false self only deepens the illusion. It reinforces a mask that was never truly yours. You become loved for who you pretend to be, and slowly forgotten by who you actually are. Solitude fixes that. Not quickly, not easily, but deeply. Because in solitude, there's no one to impress, no one to protect, no one to perform for. Just you and the truth. This is why solitude feels heavy at first, because you're carrying the weight of everything you've ignored. But weight is not always a burden. It's resistance, and resistance is how strength is built. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." The imagined pain of being alone is often worse than the actual experience. What you find in solitude isn't emptiness, it's clarity. It's the echo of your intuition growing louder. It's the return of your focus. It's the realization that you were never actually lost. You were just surrounded by too much noise to hear your own direction. When you learn to sit in solitude, a strange thing begins to happen. You stop needing as much. You stop explaining yourself. You stop feeling compelled to prove your value, because now you know it. Not in theory, but in experience. You've seen yourself without the makeup of performance, without the decoration of praise, without the safety net of someone else's opinion, and you're still standing, stronger, sharper, more grounded. The person who can face solitude becomes unshakable, not because they don't feel pain, but because they no longer fear it. They've faced the fire, they've stayed inside it, and they've emerged with something the crowd can't replicate: self-possession. You no longer chase people who don't see you. You no longer give energy to places that drain you. You no longer try to prove your worth to anyone, because you've already proven it to yourself, in silence, in stillness, in the sacred place where masks fall and truth rises. That's the gift of solitude. That's why it's a forge. So if you're in a season where no one's calling, where you feel invisible, where the nights are quiet and the days feel long, don't run from it. Walk into it. This is your place of power. This is where the noise ends and the real story begins. Not the one they wrote for you, the one you were always meant to live. It starts so subtly you barely notice. A compliment lights you up. A glance makes your heart race. A message left on read leaves you doubting your worth for hours. And slowly, without ever meaning to, you hand over your power to people who were never meant to hold it. You begin to see yourself through their reactions. Their silence becomes your shame. Their approval becomes your identity. You wait for confirmation that you're enough, that you matter, that you're not invisible. But validation, when it comes from outside, is a thief in disguise. It feels like warmth, but it steals your fire. You say yes when your heart is screaming no, just to avoid disappointing someone. You remain in places that drain you because you're afraid of being misunderstood. You silence your opinions, your instincts, your needs, because you think being agreeable is the price of being accepted. And all the while, your life becomes a performance, a collection of small betrayals done in the name of being liked. Not because you're weak, but because you were never taught the strength that comes from standing alone. You were taught that being seen is the goal. But the Stoics knew better. They warned that anything external, applause, opinions, approval, if it can shake your peace, it owns you. And anything that owns you weakens you. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But most people never do. They keep waiting for someone to name them worthy. They put their confidence on layaway, hoping it gets delivered through compliments or relationships. But if your identity relies on how others treat you, it will always be unstable. You'll constantly adjust, constantly shapeshift, constantly negotiate your value through the eyes of others. And that isn't confidence. That's dependence dressed as humility. The need to be validated robs you of your clarity. It makes you question what you know to be true simply because someone else didn't approve of it. You start second-guessing your direction. You delay your growth, not because you're confused, but because someone else didn't clap when you began. You start choosing what looks good instead of what feels right. Carl Jung once wrote, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, it will tell you." And what the world tells you is shaped by trends, opinions, and convenience, not truth. Validation trains you to ask others what you should already be answering for yourself. What makes this even more dangerous is that validation feels good. It feels like safety. It feels like belonging. But belonging that costs your truth is not belonging. It's imprisonment. When you live for the approval of others, you abandon your ability to approve of yourself. You forget how to trust your own gut. You lose the sound of your own voice. And over time, the silence inside becomes so loud that you can't even remember what you wanted in the first place. That's the real price of needing to be seen. You vanish. And here's the most painful part. People can sense it. When you need their validation to feel whole, they know. Maybe not consciously, but something shifts. Your presence becomes negotiable. Your self-worth becomes dependent on their mood. And instead of being respected, you're tolerated. Not because you're not enough, but because you gave the impression that you don't know you are. When you forget how to stand alone, others forget how to value your presence. That's the paradox. The more you need them to see you, the more invisible you become. Seneca said, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." If your attention is always on how others perceive you, there's no attention left for who you actually are. Your energy is scattered, your will becomes diluted, and what could have been strength becomes hesitation. Validation pulls you out of the present moment and into an endless performance of trying to please, impress, or avoid rejection. And the longer you stay on that stage, the harder it becomes to walk off of it. But you can walk off. You can return to yourself. You can begin the process of choosing your own voice over applause, your own clarity over confusion, your own path over popularity. And it starts by noticing where the leaks are, where you say yes when you want to say no, where you wait for permission that was never needed, where you lower your volume just to stay close to someone who's only half listening. Those are the places where your power is bleeding out, and they are also the places where it can be reclaimed. You do not need to be seen by the crowd to be real. You do not need to be validated to have value. You do not need to be accepted by others to belong to yourself. The most powerful person in any room is the one who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone, not out of arrogance, but out of deep, grounded, unshakable presence. That's the kind of presence that doesn't beg to be seen. It simply is, and it cannot be ignored. Socrates once said, "To find yourself, think for yourself." But you can't think clearly when you're constantly looking sideways to see who's watching. You can't build something solid when your foundation is built on the ever-changing tides of public opinion. You must stand still. You must go quiet. You must ask yourself, who am I when no one is watching? Because that person, that quiet, raw, untouched self, is the only one who can carry you through fire. Validation will never fill the void it promises to. It only enlarges it. The more you feed it, the hungrier it becomes. But if you stop feeding it, if you sit in the silence, in the absence of praise, you'll discover something else entirely, a deeper strength, a calm certainty, a solidness that does not move when others shift around you. That is what you've been chasing, not attention, not popularity, but peace. And that peace isn't found in being liked, it's found in being aligned. So let them think what they want, let the messages stay unanswered, let the approval go unspoken. If you know who you are, you've already won, and that kind of inner clarity, that's something no one can give you, and no one can take away. You can spend your whole life trying to be chosen, waiting for someone to notice you, to see your value, to reach out and fill the space you've never learned to sit in yourself. And yet, no matter how much you give, no matter how carefully you craft your words, no matter how tightly you hold on, what isn't meant for you always finds a way to slip through your hands. That's the hard truth we're never taught. We're told to chase, to prove, to hold tighter when something starts to drift. But real strength doesn't chase, it doesn't beg. It lets go and watches what stays without needing to be pulled. Letting go isn't about bitterness or building walls. It's about self-respect. It's the decision to stop exhausting yourself over things that were never yours to carry. You don't need to convince someone to stay. You don't need to explain why you deserve consistency, care, or honesty. You don't need to keep offering more of yourself in hopes that someone finally gives you the bare minimum in return. What's meant for you will recognize you. It will meet you where you are. It will not need a performance, a compromise, or a disguise. And if something requires all three, it was never alignment, it was an arrangement. You become untouchable the moment you stop needing external proof that you matter. That's where the shift begins, not in the absence of pain or disappointment, but in the way you respond to it. Instead of shrinking, you remain still. Instead of chasing, you pause. Instead of trying to win someone over, you win yourself back. And this isn't just a mindset, it's a decision that touches everything. The way you talk to yourself, the way you walk away from chaos, the way you protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." You cannot control who stays or who leaves. You cannot control how someone sees you, or whether they'll ever understand your depth. But you can control how you respond to their absence. You can choose not to fill that space with desperation, noise, or validation. You can choose to keep building your peace, even when no one's watching. And in that quiet decision, you become immovable. The world might try to convince you that staying single means something's missing, that solitude is a placeholder for the real thing. But here's the truth. Solitude doesn't delay your life. It reveals it. It teaches you how to hold your own hand before reaching for someone else's. It reminds you that your mind, your time, your presence are not to be offered to anyone who hasn't earned the right to receive them. Staying single doesn't mean you've closed your heart. It means you've learned how to guard your throne. You've learned that not everyone deserves a seat at your table, and love is not an excuse to abandon your crown. There is a quiet kind of power in the person who no longer seeks to explain themselves, who doesn't feel the need to argue for their worth, who simply knows who they are and doesn't rush to be understood. This is the beginning of sovereignty. It doesn't come from having everything figured out. It comes from no longer trying to force what doesn't flow. It's the calm that rises when you stop swimming against the current and finally let the river carry you where you were always meant to go. Seneca wrote, "A wise man is content with himself." And that kind of contentment isn't a passive resignation, it's a courageous surrender, a refusal to let your peace be dictated by things beyond your reach. Letting go means releasing the future you imagined with someone who was never ready to meet you there. It means accepting that no apology will rewrite the past, and no amount of effort will fix what was built on imbalance. It means stopping the cycle of overgiving in the hope that someone will finally see you. It's not easy, it's not soft. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, but also the most liberating. Because in that moment of release, you get to come back to yourself. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And becoming untouchable isn't about becoming numb. It's about becoming clear. Clear about what you deserve. Clear about what you will no longer tolerate. Clear about how many times you've betrayed your own needs just to hold on to something that made you feel less alone, but more lost. And when that clarity hits, something begins to shift. You start walking differently, speaking differently. You no longer rush to fill silence with explanations. You no longer crumble when someone leaves. You know that your worth isn't something another person can hand you or take away. This is where untouchable begins, not with armor, but with truth. Not with distance, but with discernment. You become untouchable not because no one can hurt you, but because no one can confuse you anymore. You know who you are, even when others don't. You know your boundaries, even when others try to test them. You know your value, even when it's not reflected back. That's what makes you dangerous, not to others, but to anything that once had the power to break you. So let go. Let go of the need to be understood. Let go of the fear of being alone. Let go of the pressure to prove your worth through proximity. Your peace does not need to be defended. It needs to be preserved. And the moment you stop offering your energy to what drains you, you'll feel it returning. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. Letting go is not the end. It's the turning point. The place where you stop seeking permission to be whole and start remembering you already are. Most people never stop moving. They're constantly reacting, refreshing, comparing, performing. They fill every silence with noise, every pause with distraction. But stillness scares them, because stillness reveals the truth, and truth requires responsibility. That's why the crowd stays loud, scrolling, chasing, explaining and convincing, hoping that if they stay distracted enough, they won't have to face how much of their life they've handed over to things that don't matter. But while they waste time in the noise, you can choose a different path, one that looks empty from the outside, but is quietly sacred from within. Because silence isn't a void, it's a workshop. And solitude, if used right, is the greatest investment of your life. What you do in the quiet will echo when the world finally starts to pay attention. While they wait to be chosen, you choose discipline. While they argue for visibility, you sharpen your focus in the dark. You build your body, not to impress but to command. You build your mind, not to perform, but to understand. You build routines that no one applauds, skills that no one sees, and character that no one understands, until one day they will. And by then, it will be too late to catch up. Because while they were chasing approval, you were building something no one could take from you: mastery. Seneca said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And it's true. Life isn't slipping through our fingers because it's too short. It's slipping away because we keep giving it to meaningless things, endlessly reacting, endlessly explaining, endlessly refreshing our identity through screens and opinions and trends. The truth is, very few people live. They just perform. They shape themselves for others so much that they forget who they were before anyone was watching. And in that performance, time evaporates, days vanish, years blur, and suddenly, life is a memory of everything they didn't build because they were too busy being seen. But when you choose silence, real silence, the kind that most can't tolerate, you stop bleeding time. You stop leaking energy. You stop living on autopilot. Solitude becomes a strategy, not a sentence. You use it to refine your habits, to study your patterns, to train your willpower like a muscle. Every hour you spend alone becomes an offering to your future self. Every distraction you resist becomes a vote for the person you're becoming. It's not glamorous, it's not visible, but that's why it works. Because no one is competing for what they can't see. There is something powerful about doing the work in private. You're not building for applause, you're building for endurance, for clarity, for sovereignty. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And that's what this is about. Not performing goodness, but embodying it. Not speaking about potential, but shaping it. Not dreaming of power, but earning it. Quietly, repetitively, without asking for permission. The time you spend in solitude is where your advantage is born. While others live in reaction, you create intention. While they wait for inspiration, you generate momentum. And while they depend on being noticed to feel worthy, you detach from needing attention at all. Because the person who doesn't need to be seen becomes impossible to ignore. There's a calm strength in those who keep their head down and build. a presence that doesn't scream. But when it finally arrives, everything shifts. You become that presence by treating solitude as sacred. You wake early, not because it's trendy, but because it gives you more hours to claim your mind before the world pollutes it. You read, not to impress others, but to refine how you think. You train your body, not to chase aesthetics, but to train your discipline to obey. You work on your craft, not to gain likes, but to gain leverage. Every decision you make in the silence is a brick laid in the foundation of a life no one else could build for you. Because no one else will understand how much it took, not until the results are undeniable. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." And this is the awakening, the realization that solitude is not a setback. It's a furnace. It burns away distraction. It forces you to reckon with your patterns. It invites you to choose who you want to be instead of passively becoming what the world wants you to be. It teaches you that consistency is louder than confidence, that showing up daily matters more than being inspired occasionally, that building quietly is more powerful than shouting loudly. You don't need to rush. You don't need to impress. You just need to build. Day after day, hour after hour, in silence, in shadows. While others are addicted to the illusion of progress, you commit to the reality of it. Not because it feels good every day, but because it feels necessary. You no longer confuse movement with momentum. You no longer mistake visibility for value. You understand the game now, and you play it differently. This is how you become unshakable, not by seeking the spotlight, but by mastering your shadows, not by proving anything to others, but by becoming someone whose presence proves itself. The kind of person who walks into a room and doesn't need to speak to be felt. That power is not born in applause. It is forged in solitude, in hours no one sees, in silence no one hears, and in self-respect no one can take. So build, not for them, for you. Build a life that feels powerful even when no one is clapping. Build a rhythm that outlasts motivation. Build a foundation that holds, no matter who stays, who leaves, who sees, or who doesn't. Build in the silence what others waste in the noise. And one day you'll realize you no longer need to be noticed. You've already become unforgettable. There's a moment, quiet, heavy, where the silence feels unbearable. It creeps in when the day winds down, when no one's reaching out, when the buzz fades and you're left with your own thoughts. And in that space, you feel it. That ache in your chest. The kind of ache that makes you question everything. Maybe it tempts you to go back to someone who didn't see your value. Maybe it whispers that being alone is a mistake, that the discomfort you're feeling is proof you're not meant for this path. But that pain, that ache, it's not your enemy, it's your entrance. It's the door you walk through on the way to transformation. Most people run from it. You won't. Pain shows up not to break you, but to show you what still owns you, what you're still attached to, what you haven't yet healed. It's a mirror, one that doesn't flatter or lie. And when you stand in front of it long enough, something shifts. You start to see your patterns, the habits that no longer serve you, the cycles you keep repeating, the people you chase to avoid sitting with your own emptiness. That's not weakness. It's just a signal, a prompt, a point of entry. The moment you stop running and decide to sit with the discomfort, everything begins to change. You start to listen, not to the noise outside, but to the quiet voice within, the one that's been drowned out by distraction. It's not always kind, and it's rarely comfortable, but it's honest. And that honesty is what sets you free, because in truth, you realize something most never do. Pain is not a punishment, it's your teacher. Carl Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The path to becoming who you are meant to be will hurt, but it will hurt far less than remaining someone you're not. Everyone wants strength, but few are willing to face the pressure that builds it. Everyone wants clarity, but few are willing to walk through the storm that clears it. You will be tempted by comfort, by nostalgia, by the illusion of safety in someone's arms. But comfort isn't always healing. Sometimes it's just delay. Sometimes the people you run back to are the same ones who kept you from evolving in the first place. And that's the test. Can you stay still while the ache burns? Can you sit in the void and resist the urge to fill it with what you've outgrown? Most people break there. They reach for someone, anyone, to silence the discomfort. But all they're doing is hitting pause on their own becoming. They think they're healing by moving on quickly, by being seen again, by pretending they're over it. But the pain never leaves. It just waits. It waits for another quiet night, another pause, another silence. Until you finally face it, it owns you. The Stoics understood this. They taught that suffering itself isn't the problem. It's our relationship to it, whether we use it or avoid it, whether we resist the lesson or we walk through it and allow it to make us better. Pain is pressure, and pressure is how diamonds are made. You can't expect to carry a crown without feeling its weight first. You can't expect to command your life if you've never had to stand through the storm without collapsing. Real peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the ability to stay grounded while pain moves through you. It's knowing that discomfort doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're growing. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." So why do we run from the very thing that makes us stronger? Because pain demands presence. It requires you to stop numbing, stop escaping, stop blaming, and look directly at what hurts. That kind of presence is rare, but it's where power lives. And once you understand that, pain loses its grip. It becomes less about suffering and more about sculpting, less about weakness and more about refinement. The more you lean into it, the more you begin to see the architecture of your own strength forming. You don't collapse anymore, you become solid, steady, still. This doesn't mean you won't feel lonely. It doesn't mean your chest won't ache when you think of what you let go of. But instead of turning away, you let that ache teach you. You let it guide you. You let it clear out the parts of you that were built on fear, on insecurity, on needing someone else to complete you. That's the real beauty of pain. It clears the path. It strips away what doesn't belong so you can begin again, lighter, sharper, more whole. There is no crown without pressure, no peace without storm, no sovereignty without sacrifice. You have to give up who you were to become who you are. And pain is the passage. It's the toll at the gate. Not to punish you, but to see if you're ready. If you're willing to face the mirror without flinching, if you're ready to be forged, because everything you want, clarity, strength, self-respect, lives on the other side of that fire. So when it hurts, don't run. When it's quiet and you feel the pull to escape, stay, breathe, listen, learn. Let the pain show you what needs to go and what needs to grow. Don't numb it, don't bury it. Let it burn through the layers that no longer serve you. And when it's done, what's left will be something unshakable, something sovereign. Because once you walk through pain with your eyes open, with your heart present, and your mind steady, nothing owns you anymore. Not loss, not silence, not the past. You no longer fear the fire. You've become it. Some will misunderstand your silence. They'll call it cold, maybe even cruel. They'll say you've closed off, that you've given up on love, but they don't understand what you're actually doing. This is not about hate, it's about power. It's about breaking the quiet, invisible chain that wraps around your identity when your worth depends on being wanted. Staying single is not a rejection of connection, it's the refusal to be ruled by it. It's standing still in a world that's obsessed with chasing, proving, and attaching. And when you stop chasing, you start rising. There's a difference between desire and dependence, between reaching for someone because you choose to, and clinging because you think they complete you. That difference is everything, because when you need someone to feel whole, you're no longer choosing, you're surviving, and that survival mode makes you smaller. You begin to compromise too soon, tolerate too much, explain too often. You slowly shapeshift into what you think they want, and call it love. But that's not love. That's fear with a beautiful disguise. You weren't made to kneel for affection. You weren't designed to bend your identity for approval. The strength you were born with, the kind that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't collapse, gets buried under the idea that you must be chosen to matter. But being single, when embraced fully, digs that strength back up. It reminds you of your own weight, your own presence. It reconnects you to something that was never meant to be outsourced, your own sense of worth. Seneca said, "He who is brave is free." And sometimes bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it looks like turning down a comfortable relationship because you can feel it will cost your peace. Sometimes it looks like walking away from someone you still care about because you know you're shrinking just to stay close. Sometimes it looks like choosing solitude, not because you want to be alone forever, but because you'd rather be whole alone than half-loved with company. That's not bitterness, that's wisdom. Love, when it's real, doesn't arrive through desperation. It doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. It doesn't demand that you shrink. But most people don't wait for that kind of love. They settle for what's available. They mistake intensity for depth, possession for passion, attachment for safety, and all the while they lose themselves piece by piece, believing the lie that needing someone is a form of strength. It's not. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's exactly why most people would rather keep seeking someone else. They haven't yet learned how to stand fully in themselves. You're not wrong for wanting connection. You're human. But when that desire turns into a void you're constantly trying to fill, it becomes a trap. You'll accept less. You'll settle sooner. You'll confuse being seen for being known. But if you can pause that pattern, if you can sit in your own presence long enough to understand it, you'll begin to feel the difference between being in love and being in need. And that's where power begins, because the person who no longer needs love to feel whole becomes impossible to manipulate. You become still while the world trembles around you. You don't flinch when someone walks away. You don't fold when the attention disappears. You don't chase when someone pulls back. You remain grounded, unshaken, and that quiet steadiness, that refusal to be moved, is what makes you untouchable. Because now, love is no longer your source. It's an addition, a choice, not a crutch, not a cure. The world will call this lonely. They'll project their own fears onto your stillness. They'll say you're avoiding love, hiding from vulnerability, closing your heart. But only you will know the truth. This stillness is not retreat. It's preparation. It's clarity. It's learning to live in such a way that love, when it finally does arrive, walks into a space that's already full, not one that's desperate to be filled. That's not cold. That's responsible. That's sovereign. There's a kind of confidence that comes when you no longer chase. Not because you've given up on love, but because you've stopped making it your identity. You've remembered that the real relationship, the one that affects everything else, is the one you have with yourself. And that relationship requires space. It requires time. It requires silence. You can't grow it in noise. You can't build it while constantly being pulled toward validation. You have to be willing to let go of comfort, of illusions, of temporary hands that feel good in the moment but hold nothing real. That's where courage lives, not in the ability to fall for someone, but in the ability to walk away when that love costs too much of yourself. To love without needing, to open without attaching, to care without collapsing. That's not weakness, that's emotional sovereignty. And you only develop that by staying alone long enough to see where your need ends and your truth begins. This isn't about building walls, it's about building discernment. So when love comes, and it will, you'll recognize it not by how loud it shouts, but by how gently it holds. You'll know it by how free you feel in its presence. Because real love doesn't chain, it doesn't demand, it doesn't ask you to prove anything. It simply meets you where you are, and the only way to be ready for that love is to become someone who no longer fears being alone. So no, this isn't about hate. It's not about rejecting love or avoiding vulnerability. It's about remembering your power. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you once handed out for the illusion of closeness. And it's about refusing to mistake being needed for being loved. When you understand that, you'll stop begging for affection and start standing like the world was always meant to notice you. Because you're no longer reaching. You're rooted. You're no longer trying to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. And in that stillness, everything changes. You don't need to be chosen to matter. You don't need to be loved to be whole. The moment you stop chasing what was never meant to complete you is the moment you begin to rise. Quietly, powerfully, unshakably. Watch the next video on your screen to keep building the life no one can take from you. And thank you, truly, for being a part of Stoic Journal.